Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Major General Larry Stutzriem, Air Force retired, and I serve as Director of Research at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Welcome to this session of the 2021 Aerospace Warfare Symposium. While we traditionally hold this event in person, we're pretty excited to exploit this year's virtual format. While I certainly miss seeing friends and having the opportunity to exchange ideas in person, in this format, we're able to share this important conversation with a far broader audience. In essence, that which has separated us brings more of us together. Well, today, one thing unifies our purpose, and that is the ability of the U.S. military to fight and win hinges on its space and air power capabilities. Nowhere has this been more apparent than in the missions, tasks, and operations of the United States Central Command, for which the past 30 years have been the focus of U.S. military operations. Today, even as our nation is preparing for a long-term era of great power competition with countries like China and Russia, the threats emanating from the CENTCOM Area of Responsibility, or AOR, continue to place our nation's interests and those of our allies at risk. So how does air and space power feature in CENTCOM operations today, and what role will space and air power play in the future? Well, to explore some of these questions, we're fortunate to be joined by two consummate space and air power warfighters, each of whom have dedicated their careers to ensuring that the United States is dominant in all warfighting domains by first being dominant in both space and air domains. With that context, let me introduce our panelists. First, Lieutenant General Greg Guillot is Commander of 9th Air Force, and he's dual-hatted as the Combined Force Air Component Commander for Southwest Asia under Central Command. He's a 31-year veteran of the Air Force, and he's responsible for delivering air and space power effects throughout U.S. Central Command's AOR. He previously served as the Director of Operations at U.S. Northern Command, which is near and dear to my heart. Now, Major General DeAnna Burt is the Deputy Commander of Space Operations Command under U.S. Space Force. And more importantly to today's discussion, she is the Commander of the Combined Force Space Component Command under United States Space Command. A decorated space professional, General Burt is responsible for managing an array of space power capabilities and people. She previously served as the Director of Operations and Communications at Headquarters Space Operations Command. Well, I'd like to start by giving Lieutenant Guillot the floor, followed by Major General Burt, for both your thoughts on the subject of aerospace power in Central Command AOR. General Guillot, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be on this Mitchell Institute panel, and certainly to share it with General Burt. You know, we were neighbors 2 houses down for a year at Peterson, and I think by the end of this Zoom session, we'll have seen each other more on the VTC than we did in person, just because of how busy she was with all the different activities going on in space over the past year, and then of course with the Northern Command activities as well. So anyway, it's great to be on the panel with her, and one of the difficulties that I'll have is separating air and space, so she can talk about the space and I'll focus on the air. But really, as you implied, they're completely integrated here in this region, and certainly in this building where I'm sitting in the CAOC overseas. So air and space, but air figures prominently in every part of our theater ops, probably most visibly in the 24/7 strike and ISR aircraft that we have overhead U.S. and coalition troops for Operation Inherent Resolve in the Iraq-Syria area, or Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan. But there's a lot more. In fact, we have air operating in 4 SAJOAs across the CENTCOM AOR, each of them heavily reliant on air, and sometimes in a supporting role where air is supporting other commanders, and sometimes where air is the supported command, just depending on the location and the situation. I'm often asked about having 4 SAJOAs and 1 CFAC instead of a CFAC per SAJOA. It really gives us a lot of flexibility to be aligned like this. And then being side by side with DeAnna and her team gives us a lot of capability to move quickly across the AOR to respond to changing priorities, any surge that could be required for a short period of time, or for instance, in the air, not so much in the space, but in the air, if there's bad weather in one part of SAJOA, we can take assets that would normally be devoted there and move them to other parts of the theater very seamlessly. So it works very effectively to have such a large area with just one air component supporting it. You had asked about the future of air in Central Command. I don't see it see no change in the foreseeable future there. I think we'll work to more fully integrate our partners here in the CENTCOM AOR. We will have certainly a continued reliance on the coalition. We have some great coalition partners who come from all over the world in the great causes that we're fighting for. I think we'll rely increasingly on dynamic force employment and bomber task force to bring forces quickly into the theater for a prescribed period of time and then back out. We like to say have them here just in time, not just in case, knowing that there are a lot of other combatant commanders who need those same capabilities. And of course, we'll have a strong reliance on our fellow components, the maritime component, the special operators, and certainly the land component, and the other commanders who work directly for Central Command, just as I do. We have a very strong relationship. We're very well integrated, and I think that we'll try to do more of that in the future. To frame what I just said, we have 5 priorities in ASCENT. One is to win the war today. The other is to posture to make sure we're ready to win the war tomorrow, deter regional aggressors, and to forge resolute partnerships. And those first 3 all require the partnership, and that's partners with other countries, but certainly partnerships with other components, and then also with the Space Force, et cetera. And you can see just how that partnership is so important for us to win today, tomorrow, and just to make sure that we've deterred the regional aggressors. The 5th one, of course, is embracing equality, and that's where we really want to make sure that our airmen live and work and operate in an environment where they can achieve everything they need to achieve without any cultural or institutional barriers that hold them back. So thanks for the opportunity to provide some opening comments. I know we'll have some questions here in a few minutes. And again, thanks for letting me be on this panel.
Thank you, General. Over to you, General Burt.
Thank you, sir. It is great to be here this morning. General Guillot, it's good to see you. Agree, we are seeing each other more this morning than we did as neighbors, both extremely busy missions. We were in Colorado Springs together. Major General DeAnna Burt, I am happy to be here today as the Combined Forces Space Component Command Commander. My job is absolutely in the center that I command. The centers I command and control are here to support the combatant commanders around the globe, particularly General Guillot and his team in CENTCOM. We deliver combat space-enabled capabilities to the Joint Edge, to the Joint Warfighter. I do that through 4 command centers. The first being the Combined Space Operations Center. So that's in Vandenberg Air Force Base. It's our space AOC, if you will, that allows us for that reach back capability to the Director of Space Forces and his team, who are currently deployed with General Guillot's team. That's the center that they reach back for space support requests or things to integrate and coordinate and synchronize with General Guillot's mission. That's how they reach to the larger space enterprises through that Director of Space Forces back to the CSPOC. Within the CSPOC, we also coordinate with other centers. The Joint Navigation Warfare Center, as General Guillot mentioned, he's doing a lot of global strike or precision strike within his AOR with air power, providing support for close air support to his ground forces. The Joint Navigation Warfare Center is important to that because our enemies know we use GPS quite frequently to do precision targeting and are looking to take that from us. The Joint Navigation Warfare Center comes up with opportunities and ways for us to fight through that jamming, as well as to help with precision strike and any concerns that the theater may have. Another op center that I work with is the Joint Overhead Persistent IR Center, or the JOPSI. It's at Buckley Air Force Base. That center does all the missile warning planning and the overhead persistent IR planning between both the Department of Defense and the national community to give the best overhead planning to the theater and for any threats that could be happening in General Guillot's AOR. And lastly, the Missile Warning Center in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. provides that bell ringer capability of incoming launches. We just saw a year ago saving lives in Al Asad Air Force Base with an inbound attack from the Iranians. The Missile Warning Center was critical in getting that information out to the theater to be able to save lives and also to allow the defense of that installation. So all of those centers work under the Combined Forces Space Component Command day in and day out to support the CENTCOM AOR along with all the other combatant commands around the world. Our focus and priorities are in fourfold. One is to deter and defend. So day in and day out, how do we understand the space domain? And we do that through space domain awareness, understanding the space picture. Who are the satellites and players in the space domain? Who are red, blue, gray, commercial, our foreign partners, working every day to keep track of all the capabilities that are on orbit in order for space traffic management to be able to operate in the domain, but also to understand patterns of life and when things are considered aggressive or hostile to defend our capabilities on orbit so we can continue to provide those space effects to General Guillot and his team. We also deliver space-enabled combat edge. So think of this as our PNT or missile warning and SATCOM, providing those directly to the theater to enable their operations, putting bombs on target, and making sure that he is meeting the strike capabilities and requirements that they in the theater have. Generating combat power, again, supporting the fight. We look at this and also helping to negate adversary capabilities. So in General Guillot's AOR, electromagnetic interference is not uncommon. So we look to defend his networks as far as to watch the signals in his AOR. He prioritizes what signals he'd like us to defend and monitor. And when those come under attack, we are making him aware for him to be able to move to other communications that we would offer or to work his power or receiver opportunities to get past that jamming. So again, it's a hand-in-hand discussion of offense and defense with space electronic warfare, being able to support General Guillot and his team, and also taking the enemy's ability out to use the electromagnetic spectrum in space with space electronic offensive capabilities. And lastly, develop space warfighter leaders, again, to work in an AOC out there with General Guillot and that DER Space 4 team. How do we train joint multi-domain space operators who understand what the fight is and what their part is and how they can best leverage the space capabilities in order to support General Guillot and his team are critical. And that requires training from as soon as they come on as a space operator. I've been in this business 28 years. I came in right after Desert Storm, which we have said is our first real space war. We've had a DER Space 4 in CENTCOM since the mid-2000s. Then Colonel Jay Raymond, now our Chief of Staff, our Chief of Space Operations, was one of those first Director of Space Forces in the AOR. So we've been doing this business with General Guillot and the CENTCOM team for quite some time and continue to improve and push the edge of our combat capability and integration. There is no seam between space and air in CENTCOM, and we are proud to serve with you, sir, every day. Thank you for my opportunity for opening comments, and I look forward to the questions.
Fantastic comments from both of you, generals. Thank you very much. Let me get into a few details, a few questions here. And I'll start with General Guillot. Given that CENTCOM has been primarily focused on counterinsurgency and counterterrorism for the last many years, do you foresee a shift in what you do and how you do it towards or in relationship to this great power competition that's come upon us? And if so, what type of impact do you think it'll have on air power readiness overall?
Well, I would say that great power competition is usually thought to be conducted in Indo-PACOM and EUCOM, but it's alive and well here in Central Command. You know, certainly in all domains, but certainly where air and space meet at the confluence of those domains, just as DeAnna just mentioned. You know, we have interference, and that you know generally could come from any of the competitors across the world. You know, Russia is physically in the area, and you know they're reestablishing themselves as a world power. PRC is also in the area, more economically focused, but on every day we are just a few miles apart from Russian aircraft out there. And so I think the great power competition is alive and well here, being fought in the CENTCOM AOR. At the same time that we try to deter that activity, we're trying to deter the regional aggressors. And those activities for both the great power competition and for the regional aggressors require different mission sets than the counterinsurgency, counterterrorism fight that you mentioned, which are still ongoing at the same time. But they often require the same aircraft. It's just we employ the aircraft in a different way. So one of the challenges that we have across the air component is ensuring that we have readiness in all the different mission sets that we could need, not just in the ones that we're currently conducting. And that's because of that competition you mentioned, as well as our need to deter. So how we do that is probably first and foremost is through our partners and the image we portray to our partners. We aim to prove that our reliability is strong, that we're committed to peace and stability in the region, and that we're willing and capable to counter terror and extremism to meet the goal of keeping stability and peace in the region. And you know, the coalition and the partners are crucial elements to doing that. One thing that we don't have a lot of time to do, but we're trying to increase the amount that we do conduct is exercises. So therefore, when we are able to exercise with our partners, we want to make sure that we not only increase the number of them when we can, but increase the complexity to reflect, you know, the ramifications of what you brought up, which is that great power competition, deterring while at the same time doing the CI and the CT missions. So far, it's going really well. It takes a lot of attention to make sure we're putting airplanes where they need to be when they need to be there. And I think we'll probably sometime over the course of this talk about COVID and how that affects our ability to do some of these exercises and move throughout the theater. But that's our position regarding the great power competition. We think it's here, and we think that we have the right assets and the model in place to counter that.
That's very interesting, and it's great to have those words that explain to our audience that it's not either or, that the great power competition that we see is coexisting with a lot of other missions out there. We'll get back to the coronavirus question in a second, General, but let me ask General Burt, also as the U.S. transitions to this great power competition, maintaining that advantage in space power is critical, of course. Can you explain how space requirements might be different for CENTCOM in that AOR compared to other regions where we face great power conflict, say in Indo-Pacific? And also, what's the biggest demand you see coming from CENTCOM with regard to space support?
So thank you. I agree with General Guillot. Just because there's not great power competition, particularly obvious in CENTCOM, there is. Both with the Russians, as he mentioned, in Syria. We see operations in Syria very much like what we would in the US look at as a red flag. I mean, day in and day out, they're actively doing work in the electromagnetic spectrum, taking out SATCOM and GPS and other things in the space domain. So we are seeing a lot of electromagnetic spectrum activity in Syria from the Russians and working to make sure we can mitigate that with General Guillot's team so it does not affect US forces and their work that they need to do. So it is happening in a great power competition absolutely every day in Syria with Russia. And I would say with China, I mean, we look at the Silk and Belt and Road, China is looking to build capabilities around the globe that allow it to downlink and operate its satellites and communicate. And so as they build that capability, they now get into a global nature of being able to command and control their capabilities. So while it may seem like in CENTCOM or even AFRICOM and some of the AORs that are more counterterrorism focused, there is absolutely great power competition going on for influence and the ability to have access for capabilities and infrastructure. When we talk about every day, what we do for CENTCOM specifically, as I mentioned, we've had a DIR Space 4 there since the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And the DIR Space 4 continues today working there on the ops floor with General Guillot's team. I think the benefit that CENTCOM brings to us every day is looking at how do we continue to improve our multi-domain fight and providing FEX to the warfighter. Space is not for space's sake. We don't have satellites just to say we have satellites. We have satellites in order to support the joint multi-domain fight and the other elements that are out there. We go to war as a nation, and that includes with your space capabilities. What's happened in the past, in the last 2 years, as we've stood up United States Space Command as a combatant command and United States Space Force as a service in order to organize, train, and equip resources for that combatant commander, is really to get after the threat that is now on orbit. And how do we defend protect and defend those resources in space so that they continue to fight and provide combat capability to the edge to General Guillot and his team. So day in and day out, that's what we want to see. And even though that great power competition is happening in the domain in space with China and Russia, we still have to fight through that and be able to provide combat effects to all of the geographic combatant commanders as they fight through the tactical problems that they face every day. A lot of great work is happening not only at General Guillot's level in the CFAC with the Space 4, but we also have at the U.S. Space Command level, the integrated planning element that's working with CENTCOM. So again, we're trying to work through planning and how do we integrate space across the board in all of CENTCOM's operational plans so that, again, this is a more deliberate focus and we start to really look at the requirements that CENTCOM needs for now and into the future. And even though it's not a great power competition fight, you see countries like Iran trying to be budding space capabilities and looking to launch their own satellites. And as we talked about, the attack on the Iraqi airbase from the Iranians that has happened. So again, there's still threats there, even other nations trying to gain in space capabilities. Just to give you a run of the numbers of the things that we provide to CENTCOM every day, my numbers are a little dated. They're from November of 20. We have since detected in 2020, 1,291 missile launches in the theater.
Wow.
Space support requests, we've processed 503. So understand a space support request is General Guillot's team, any of his components working in the CFAC or in CENTCOM, being able to provide a space support request back to our ops floor in Vandenberg to say that they need space capability for a particular operation. We've processed 503 of those. So again, working hand in hand, what he needs, when he needs it, and the timing and tempo of the fight. I think that's what really is the greatest advantage for us as a Space Force and U.S. Space Command to continue engaging with each of the COCOMs is that multi-domain discipline. And space is not for space's sake. It's in order to have those satellites to provide combat effects to our other joint brothers and sisters in the other domains.
Hey, General Burt, if I could just follow up, because you made a couple points there that I want to emphasize. You look at your AOR is the planet Earth, and you tailor and it supports CENTCOM. I don't want to step too far outside CENTCOM. Could you explain that? You have quite a wide lens. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I do. I just want to do one slight tactile correction. So it's General Dickinson, the U.S. Space Commander's AOR, and it's from 100 kilometers to infinity per the UCP. So he owns 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface to infinity. So he has in my mind, he's a hybrid combatant commander. He is a functional, and that you're right, he has a global requirement to support all of the other geographic combatant commanders with space effects to the Earth's surface below 100 kilometers. He also then is a geographic combatant commander himself at 100 kilometers to infinity. So it's an interesting mix when you look at it and how we would work that. I have a responsibility, as does all of U.S. Space Command, to support all the combatant commanders. And so the integrated planning elements are out there in every of the COCOMs, and they're growing. We have directors of space forces in each of the major CFACs and AOCs that are stood up. So again, those relationships are not going to change. We're going to continue to be embedded with the other COCOMs and down directly into the air component. I think over the next year, you're going to see U.S. Space Command and the United States Space Force now in their second years both address force presentation and how we would both do that more efficiently. So General Guillot mentioned readiness and how you force present. I think the Space Force now, as we've stood up a new service and the combatant command, how do we do that efficiently with the resources that we have, and at what echelon do those forces live will be a large discussion between General Raymond and General Dickinson over the next year as we work through how to best force present. My job day to day, though, will be to ensure that the ball is not dropped anywhere, and until those decisions are made, we continue to provide stellar space support across the globe.
That's outstanding, General. Well, I'd like to get back to an interesting discussion or note you brought up, General Guillot. And just yesterday, Doug Berkey, who's our executive director at Mitchell, and I had stumbled upon a work back in the early 2000s that almost described what's happened with the coronavirus to a T. And of course, when I was at Northcom in the plans shop, we were talking about pandemics. You are now constantly engaging with allies and partners across the region. And I'm curious how the coronavirus has affected your ability to work collaboratively with this very important coalition you mentioned. Are there lessons to apply also to the future, when this crisis is over? Curious what you think about that.
Yeah, there are some lessons certainly that I think will apply in the end and continue, because we've gained some efficiencies. But I think overall COVID has significantly impacted how we operate here in the theater, but through the mitigation efforts, it has not impacted our ability to operate in the theater. We remain 100% combat capable due to some very strict mitigation efforts that ultimately are a strain on the airmen and the deployed force. As you intimated a moment ago, partnerships are key, and the key leader engagements, or the KLEs, are the main vehicle we use, at least at the more senior levels of our command, to work with our partners to ensure that we're building and growing together. Through COVID and just the various ways COVID has impacted the different countries in the AOR, there's been almost no travel within the theater. The virtual KLEs continue, so we found new ways to talk, secure phone, non-secure phones, similar to this, VTCs, to try to keep the dialogue going and keep the partnership growing, despite the fact that we can't meet face-to-face or have commanders conferences like we had in the past. I will say that WhatsApp is turning out to be the official C2 mechanism for the theater. I certainly text WhatsApp 2 or 3 of the air chiefs from across the region every day, just staying in touch. Sometimes it's official, sometimes it's unofficial, just to see how they're doing. And that's actually one of the lessons learned, something we would have never done before, but it's been really helpful. It takes away the aligning of the schedules, and you can just, if you have a couple minutes, shoot off a quick note on something coming up or something that you observed, and then you can get a reply on their time. So I think that once we conquer COVID, and I think that we'll still rely on some of those tools, the quick VTCs or FaceTimes or the WhatsApp. Training is important to continue. We've continued to train with our partners, but in a different way. Normally we would go to a base or meet at a base and do very elaborate face-to-face briefings, go out and fly in the airspace, land, and do the face-to-face debriefings. We can't do that, but we've had a number of cases where we've met them on a VTC beforehand, gone over the training rules and the objectives, met out in the airspace and fought, landed, and then got back together on the VTC and passed the lessons learned in the debrief items. And I think that will continue, which will increase the number of events we have now that we aren't confined to being able to meet in a building to meet face to face. So that's the partner portion of it. Larry, there is an effect on the airmen, and I'd be interested to see if DeAnna's noticed the same thing, especially as this is approaching a year where we've had really heavy mitigation efforts. It certainly has limited the amount of training that our airmen conduct before they get over here. There are a number of training schools and pipeline courses that were either canceled or they had to do them by video instead of in person. So we've certainly seen the effects of that. We have to maintain quarantine. What's we call it quarantine, not quarantation. Yeah, we call them
the active quarantining.
Trying not to use an acronym, and I forgot what the word stood for. But anyway, we have these quarantine facilities on each of our bases that, of course, come from out of hide to manage them, and sometimes there's hundreds of airmen in there at a time to make sure that they do not have the virus before they join the close confines of the general base population here. We found some really innovative ways, back to your original question, where we have some working quarantines where some aviation units have come in and during their 2-week quarantine have been able to generate, fly, and fix while they're in quarantine, because we've been able to isolate them from other parts of the base. And I'm sure there's people all across the services who are doing that, but doing that in combat is pretty unique, and certainly something that wasn't in our picture more than a year ago, to be able to do that. The face-to-face meetings have virtually ceased, and that is starting to show a very visible impact on morale. our leaders are trying innovative ways to keep airmen in touch. But so many, rely on the close cohesiveness of their group and their teammates especially when you're deployed, in a combat environment. And we very deliberately tell them they can't do that. And so we're seeing some strains. We have some great support networks, just as you'd expect, from the chaplains, for example, the medical community, and just really engaged leaders that are trying to find ways around that so we can keep people engaged, the morale up, despite the fact that, we can't sit down very often at the same table and talk face to face. So overall, just to recap, certainly how we operate has changed. Our ability to operate has not. We're still 100% combat capable because of these mitigation efforts.
That's interesting. I'm curious also, just as a follow-up, in my career before this age of a lot of connectivity, it was very difficult to maintain the relationships you built, with your colleagues in other nations. It seems to me that we'd be able to build those relationships across a career much better, as you described with the WhatsApp and other, applications. Do you hold a lot of confidence in that?
Yes, I do. And I strangely, I think it has helped me. I took over here in July, and normally you'd have a very deliberate set of flights to different countries over a period of time. But with these new methods, I met by phone, VTC, and WhatsApp, all of them within, about a week and a half period. So the initial contact was much sooner. They're very comfortable operating in this way. Everybody understands. It's not like anybody's, neglecting anybody else. Everybody understands the reason for it. And I think that's helped us gel as a group or as a team faster. And I'd like to see that continue. So I think you're right. I think it is a little easier now that we're using these systems to at least establish and get the foundational level of a good relationship going. And I look forward to when you can meet face to face, because as you know, that's a very important element to it.
Of course. Yeah.
But I think when we get to that point, I think we'll be on solid footing because of these other technologies we've been able to apply.
Yeah, very good. Well, General Burt, you brought up that we recently celebrated a 30th anniversary of Operation Desert Storm, and that many consider that to be the first space war. You've spent almost your whole career in space warfighting. I'm curious, looking to the next 10 years or so from a warfighting perspective, what would you say the Space Force needs now to be ready to compete long into the future, in particular for CENTCOM?
That's a great question. I think moving forward, we have to continue to work. Again, space is a newly founded warfighting domain. Again, the threats have now come to space. I think from Desert Storm and to today, they have seen our reliance on space, not just the American way of war, but the American way of life, and they're looking to take it from us. So now it becomes more about how do you go from a peacetime domain to a warfighting domain, and how do you defend and protect and defend the resources that are in that domain. And to do that is all foundational with intelligence. So building the intelligence infrastructure that will enable us to understand space domain awareness, everything that is on orbit, and how can we characterize it, its pattern of life. How do we understand something moving forward? Is this a friend or foe? In other domains, those are clearly articulated. The same with norms and behavior. I think that will be the most critical foundation in the next few years, and we've been working that very heavily with our coalition and commercial partners of what is a norm of behavior. If I were asked to ask General Guillot, what is a hostile act in the air domain? He might rattle off things like hey, they turn nose hot and they light me up with their radar. That could be considered a hostile act depending on the ROE and the area of responsibility. That's unusual in space. We don't have those kinds of norms and conditions yet as a domain. And so how do we work with our international and coalition partners? We have a meeting in the UN here coming up in May to work with our closest allies on defining what are those rules and norms in space and what's acceptable behavior. And then when acceptable behavior isn't done, as we've seen in previous with ASAT tests by our Russian counterparts or capabilities put on orbit that are not for peaceful purposes, how do we then call that out publicly and as a coalition deter and defend against those capabilities by calling them out because they're against the norms and behaviors. So I think that's going to be the foundation moving forward, that intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance picture of what's in the domain, the norms of behavior to operate in that domain, and it's a shared understanding with our coalition and commercial partners. And then moving forward, the ability to protect and defend a war that could extend into space in order, as I said, to defend those space assets so we can continue to provide capabilities to the joint fight.
And by the way, General Burt, we will vigorously support good policy decisions here in Washington, D.C. As you know, in our mission, we communicate. A lot of this folks don't understand, and it's important for them to be educated. We're behind you on that, that's for sure.
I appreciate that you bring that up. If I could just pile on to
Sure.
that. I mean, I think General Raymond recently said in a talking point, and I don't think many people understand it, you can't reach out and touch a satellite. You can't feel it, you can't hug it. You don't see pictures of them very frequently. When you do see pictures, they're typically cartoons. They're not the real images of them. And so that makes it very difficult for the American people to understand the importance. I mean, it's in their everyday life and it's in the way we fight the American way of war, as I said, but you can't see it, you can't touch it. The second piece of that is that satellites don't have moms. If someone takes out a satellite, no one's getting a letter that the satellite died, right? It's right. The loss of human life seems to be what most countries, and not just in the US, but most countries determine what a hostile act is, that life has to be lost for something to be, or the potential for life to be lost if there's a hostile act. I think the part that the Space Force needs to continue and US Space Command needs to continue is to discuss how the space capabilities that we provide day in and day out, that if a satellite is taken out, that there are second and third order effects that lives would be lost. So I'll give you an example of a missile warning satellite. It's the bell ringer, it's the duck and cover. It's also the bell ringer for any missile defense or any capability to shoot an incoming missile out of the sky. If that satellite is taken out, there could be less time to duck and cover. We could lose lives if missiles hit the ground. There could also be not all of the missiles being able to be targeted based on the fact that there was no bell ringer to the shooter. So I think there can be and will be lives lost if space capabilities are taken out, but it will be a second and third order effect and not something direct. One we think about a lot is debris on orbit with the ISS and the astronauts who are on orbit day in and day out. We are trying to protect those, and we do move the ISS, particularly for pieces of debris when those things happen over the years it's been up. But again, without a human involved and without a mom and some of those things, I think it's very esoteric about war in space. And again, it's no different than if you were to ask General Guillot about RPAs. So if the enemy shoots down an RPA, is that seen as an act of war? There was no human on board. It's considered a sensor. It may have bombs on it, it may not. But again, how do we respond as a nation when these remotely piloted capabilities are taken out? It's very similar to the discussions we have about satellites and with the American people. And how do we understand the importance of those assets and taking them out, that there will be loss of life as second and third order effects. And that's a hard message to tell because of the classification of the threats and the ability to attribute and show that to the American people of what's out there.
Very good. A very good logic. Thank you. I'm going to ask General Guillot a parallel question. You mentioned some of the challenges of managing 4 combined joint operating areas. What do you need to both accomplish your mission today and prepare your forces in particular to prevail in the future? And I know your sight picture is the next several years. Maybe you could address it from an intermediate time horizon.
Sure. I would say first and foremost, we need and rely upon rotational forces via the global force management system. You know, we have about 14,000 plus in AFCENT, and about 13,000 of them are rotational forces. You know, and so we rely on primarily on the Air Force, but really from all of the services for our force. And then we need them to arrive ready, trained, and healthy. You know, which is the healthy part is to the last question, something we've really added over the last year. But we can't afford to have them come and you know, be sick and then potentially take out a complete capability for which there's no replacement, just because they were carrying a virus that maybe they didn't know, you know, being asymptomatic. So the rotational force arriving ready, capable, and healthy. Next thing I think that we're going to need, we're trying to do now, I think we're doing a decent job now, but I think it'll grow, is cross-combatant command capability sharing. We have cases where, a good example would be maybe an RQ-4 that can fly for 24 hours, may cross multiple combatant commands during the execution of a mission for one of them. And so being able to get non-interference basis target of opportunity collects on that. And then the same thing for tankers. And then, as you heard me mention, dynamic force employment and bomber task force, they can hit multiple combatant commands during the course of one of their missions. And so I think you'll see us try to share a little bit more and be the recipient of some sharing. And there's some great examples of that just recently with some bomber task force missions into the area. And I talked to General Harigian and USAF all the time, certainly with Transcom and Global Strike, on ways that we can get more out of the same amount of capability. So AFRICOM as well. So I think you'll see more of that, and that's what we'll need to do collectively a little bit better. And then we'll need a strong coalition. We can't do this alone. We have no intent of doing this alone. And that's in the air, but it's also in the CAOC. Right now we have 17 countries who are represented in the CAOC. 7 or 8 of them actually fly out there in the in the SAJOAs with us, and the rest have capabilities here in the AOC that are filling great roles in combat plans and intel, keeping things going. And so it doesn't have to be a huge presence, but it's an extremely important presence no matter what the level is, and we'll have to keep that strong coalition going. Operationally, what I think we'll need to do over the next few years is continue to improve our agility. Agile combat employment is a capability or a competency that is important to many combatant commands, and certainly it is here in Central Command with AFCENT. Having ACE competencies gives us the agility and the responsiveness that we need inside the theater that complements the agility and responsiveness of Transcom and Strategic Command to rapidly get to the theater, right? So we can bring the capabilities over here quickly, then we can execute agilely with ACE, and then that keeps us from being a just-in-case theater, as I mentioned earlier, and we can have the capabilities we need where we need them just in time. So we've worked a lot on that, on ACE over the last 6 months, and the airmen have come up with some just fantastic accomplishments and achievements in that. So you're familiar from your past with hot pit refueling. I think most people on this telecast will be. But for the first time ever in the 60+ years of the aircraft, we hot pit refuel KC-135s, and we do it routinely. And then they worked it back with great partnership with Transcom and AMC to get it into the TOs, where now not only do we do it in this theater, but those bases back in the States can practice it before they come over here. How do we use that? We had one sortie where one KC-135 took off out of Turkey, did an OIR mission, refueled all of its aircraft, landed at Al Udeid, kept the engines running, hot pit, went back up, did another combat mission, came back, hot pitted, and also did a engine running crew change. So we brought a new crew on. Anyway, they did 6 combat missions and returned to Incirlik in a 24-hour period without ever turning off the airplane. 2 or 3 crew changes, just phenomenal. Something that we would have never thought of doing years ago. And as you know, airplanes generally don't break when they're running, and then so this helps us with our with our maintenance capability in the long run. So you'll see that we've done for the first time engine running crew changes in fighters, and obviously it has to be a 2-seat fighter, so our Strike Eagles can routinely swap out a crew after they do an integrated combat turn on an aircraft. And I think it's important to know that we're doing these while conducting combat missions, not as part of an exercise or a demonstration. This is something we rely on day to day doing combat operations. Yeah. And we've even done that with an MQ-9, if you can believe that, where we were able to take an MQ-9 off from one base and due to weather, land it at a different base, refuel it, rearm it, send it right back out to the airspace for another 17 to 20-hour sortie, and it was able to land at its home base again once the weather cleared out. Really phenomenal capability that our airmen are producing every day. And so I think that's what we're going to need to handle whatever the growing threat would be, or next year's threat. And then everybody that comes over here, I started off with rotational forces, and I'll end with that. Our goal is that the airmen return to their home station from AFCENT more comprehensively ready than they were when they arrived, by giving them the opportunity to do some of these things that you might not be able to do in a peacetime training environment.
Very good. We've just got a few minutes left, and then I've got to let you both get back to your missions. But I'd like to ask one last question to General Burt. That we've had what appears to be an explosion of innovation with the standing up of Space Force, and I'm curious how that may be affecting, through your view as warfighter, whether processes or presence in any way will be modified in the CENTCOM AOR to amplify even more the contribution space is making to that region.
No, I think you're right. It's an exciting time to be a space operator. I mean, I've been in this business 28 years, and there's never been a faster, more exciting time than to be in the Space Force today. Day in and day out, we want to be a digital service. We want to get into more automation and streamlining of efficiencies of our process. I think even in structure, you will see, if you look at the Space Force structure, we've eliminated elements of bureaucracy. We've eliminated NAFs. We've eliminated groups. It's a more flat organization, very small and lean. Everything is mission focused, and we want to move fast. And our chief has tasked us to be digital service and be digitally focused. And so we've been a lot of how do we get to machine operations? How do we play very much in the air battle management system, putting our space COP and integrating with the air domain, as well as in the greater joint community in JADC2. So how do we keep looking for capability to bring that forward? So I think in support of CENTCOM, what we hope to see is faster, leaner, more ability to get things directly to General Guillot in a way. On our ops floor, we've gone to a 5-eye concept, so to talk to his coalition and to be engaged with them. We do that every day on our ops floor back at Vandenberg. So again, recognizing what the coalition and the commercial elements bring to the fight, and also providing those forward. A lot of capability has gone to the commercial side. We've seen some of that explosion in the stand-up of Space Force due to folks like SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, others that are building space capability and launch capability, bringing down the price of launch. So those are all things we're taking advantage of as a new service as we move forward to lower costs and to continue to provide combat capability forward. So I think that's only going to continue. And I think in endgame, it's going to mean General Guillot gets better capabilities, more resilient capabilities that allow him to do machine-to-machine integration with his operations day in and day out.
Well, we've come to the end of this virtual Aerospace Warfare Symposium event, and it's been a great discussion. Thanks again to General Greg Guillot and General DeAnna Burt. Thank you so much for your comments and your time. We know you're busy, and we wish you the best on behalf of the Air Force Association as you deal with the challenges ahead that affect our ability to fight and win. Thanks again. And to all of you from the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, please have a great aerospace powered day.